The storm outside had barely begun when Sofia Alvarez felt her entire life tipping toward another night of exhaustion. Rain hammered the tiny diner windows like impatient fingers, and the wind carried the sound of distant sirens across the city. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered weakly over the empty booths. It was the kind of night when no one should have been out, yet she was there, apron tied tight, hands trembling from double shifts, wondering how long she could keep going before something finally broke. And then the door opened, and the moment that would change her life forever stepped quietly into the diner. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of doing good even when no one is watching, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It truly helps more than you know. Sofia noticed him immediately, though not because he looked important. In fact, he looked the opposite, frail, lost, confused, his clothes damp from the weather, his gait uneven. One of his hands shook as he held onto the edge of a booth for balance. Sofia had seen people like him before, people life had pushed into corners no one wanted to talk about. But something in his eyes, a quiet dignity despite the trembling, made her step toward him instantly. He tried to speak, but the words tangled on his tongue. When he finally sat down, she realized he couldn't lift the spoon to his mouth. Sofia didn't hesitate. She warmed a bowl of soup, placed it gently before him, and then, with the tender patience of someone who had known hardship too well, she began feeding him slowly, making sure he felt no shame. She didn't care who he was. She didn't care that she was already running on fumes and had hours of cleanup left. She only cared that he didn't look alone in that moment. She did not know that hidden across the street, the man's son, a billionaire known for his cold precision and unshakable composure, was watching everything. Ethan Hale had grown accustomed to controlling markets, winning negotiations, and shutting out emotions. But nothing, not boardrooms, not investments, not the empire he built, had prepared him for the collapse of the strongest man he had ever known, his father, Samuel Hale. The disease had taken Samuel's independence, his speech, and almost his pride. Ethan had been searching for him for hours after his caregivers called to report he'd wandered off. When he finally spotted him through the rain-smeared diner window, being cared for by a stranger with infinite gentleness, something inside Ethan cracked open. He saw a young woman who had no idea she was being watched, no idea that the act of compassion she offered would shift her destiny. He expected resentment, disgust, or impatience, but instead, she offered humanity with the softness of someone who still believed the world had good left in it. Ethan took a breath so heavy it felt like it scraped against old grief inside him, and he stepped into the diner. Sofia didn't turn around when the door opened again. She was focused on Samuel, gently wiping his mouth, whispering encouraging words he could barely respond to. For a moment Ethan didn't speak, but simply watched, absorbing what it meant that a stranger was treating his father with more warmth than he had allowed himself to show in years. He approached slowly, his expression unreadable. But Sofia felt his presence and looked up, startled to find a man who radiated power but carried a sorrow that weighed more than any fortune. It wasn't long before she understood he was the old man's son, though she didn't know who he was, not really. She only noticed the way he carefully took his father's hand, and she instinctively stepped back to give them space. Ethan whispered something to his father, a sound more emotional than a word, and Samuel responded with a faint, fragile smile. Sofia assumed that would be the end of it. She had done what anyone should do. She didn't expect anything in return. In fact, she hurried back to the counter, embarrassed by the idea of being thanked. But Ethan wasn't leaving without speaking to her. He followed her to the counter, watching her scrub a stain from the surface as if she wanted to disappear into her work. What he saw instead was a young woman holding together a life that kept threatening to fall apart. He recognized struggle when he saw it. Her hands carried the tremor of someone who had been working through their own storms long before tonight. And then the rain outside turned into a downpour, booming across the roof, making the diner feel smaller, more intimate. Ethan knew he needed to thank her, but he also knew the world rarely rewarded people like her, people who were kind simply because they chose to be. He left with his father shortly after, but something inside him refused to forget the sight of her. Days passed, and the world returned to its noise. Sofia returned to her shifts, believing nothing remarkable had happened. But on a quiet morning when the diner was nearly empty, a black car stopped outside. Two men in suits entered, speaking softly to the manager. Moments later, Sophia was called outside, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. Ethan stood waiting. He thanked her again, but this time he came not just with gratitude, but with something she never expected. He told her about his father, about the battle they were fighting, about the night she had unknowingly given Samuel dignity when his own strength had abandoned him. He told her that kindness like hers was not common, and certainly not unnoticed. And finally, he handed her a letter, one that would change everything. Inside was an offer to fund her education, pay off her debts, and give her a chance to pursue the nursing career she had longed for but had buried beneath bills and responsibilities. Sophia couldn't speak. Tears blurred the edges of the world, and Ethan simply nodded, understanding. She had given his father humanity. He wanted to give her a future. In the months that followed, Samuel's condition progressed, but now he had Sophia visiting, not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. Ethan watched as his father responded to her presence more than to any treatment. Something about her voice calmed him. Something about her kindness revived the parts of him the illness had not yet stolen. Ethan found himself changed as well. Compassion had re-entered his life through the girl who had fed soup to a stranger. He realized wealth meant nothing if it didn't help someone stand a little taller. Sophia's journey, her resilience, and the purity of her heart reminded him of the world he had long pushed away in favor of power. Months later, when Samuel passed peacefully with his son holding one hand and Sophia holding the other, Ethan understood fully how one act of kindness had rewritten all their lives.